For more than 3 weeks, the FBI asked the public to focus on a single moment: a masked man standing at Nancy Guthrie's front door in the darkness outside her Tucson home. But that moment was only part of the story. Newly surfaced surveillance images reveal the same figure returning again, earlier, quieter, studying the house before she ever disappeared. He was not rushing. He was not improvising. He was watching, waiting. The 84-year-old mother of television host Savannah Guthrie vanished without a trace, leaving behind her phone, her medication, and a bloodstain that should not have been there. No arrests have been made. No suspects have been named. And investigators now believe the most important clue may have been hiding in plain sight from the beginning. This was not chance. This was not random. This was preparation. And by the end of this video, you will see why former investigators believe these images may expose the person responsible. And what they reveal could change everything we think we know about that night forever, today, now, for all time ahead now. Saturday evening, January 31st, 2026, begins without alarm, without urgency, without anything that would suggest it would become the last normal night in the life of Nancy Guthrie. She spends it the way she had spent hundreds of other evenings over the years, surrounded by family, inside her daughter's home in the quiet foothills outside Tucson. The house is warm, filled with conversation, the familiar comfort of routine. There is nothing forced about the laughter, nothing rehearsed, nothing that feels like goodbye. She had arrived earlier that evening, just after sunset, carried there by a rideshare driver who would later tell investigators there was nothing unusual about the trip. She was calm, relaxed, ordinary. Hours passed the way they always do when people believe they still have time. Dinner plates were cleared, chairs shifted, stories repeated. At 9:48 p.m., her family walked her outside. The desert air had cooled. They watched as she stepped away, toward the home she had lived in for decades, toward the front door she would never walk back out of freely again. She entered, the door closed, the lock engaged, and with that sound, her timeline separated from everyone else's. The next morning, the first indication that something was wrong did not come from police. Came from absence. She did not answer her phone. She did not respond to messages. She did not arrive at the weekly church stream she never missed. Concern turned into alarm. Alarm turned into action. When deputies arrived at her home, the silence inside felt heavier than it should have. There were no signs of forced entry visible from the street. No shattered glass. No broken hinges. But the front porch told a different story. Small stains marked the concrete. Dark, irregular, tested hours later and confirmed to belong to her. Blood does not appear without cause. Blood does not explain itself. It only proves that something happened. Inside, her phone remained on the counter. Her purse rested where she had left it. Her medications sat untouched. The routines that kept her alive had been interrupted. And the interruption had not been her choice. Investigators made the determination quickly. This was not a disappearance. This was an abduction. But the most important missing item was not immediately obvious. The camera was gone. The Nest doorbell that had been mounted beside her front door, watching every arrival and every departure, had been torn away, removed completely. Whoever had taken it understood its purpose, understood its risk, or at least believed they did. What they did not understand was where the real evidence lived. Inside remote servers, inside digital archives, inside systems they could not reach. When the Federal Bureau of Investigation accessed the account, they found what the suspect had tried to erase. Video. Recorded in darkness. Preserved in silence. Released days later. The footage begins with stillness. The porch empty. The desert night unmoving. Then movement enters the frame. A figure steps forward slowly. Covered completely. Face hidden behind a mask. Hands concealed inside gloves. He does not hesitate. He does not look around nervously. He moves with purpose. He reaches toward the camera, pauses, and then tries to cover it. When that fails, he disappears briefly, returning with debris pulled from the yard. Branches, leaves, whatever he can find. He presses them against the lens in a frantic attempt to blind it, but it has already seen him, already recorded him, already preserved the mistakes he cannot take back. Investigators study every frame, his height, his build, the way he carries himself, the equipment attached to his body, a backpack, a holster, objects that would later become some of the most important clues in the entire case. The backpack was identified as a model sold nationwide through Walmart. Cheap, accessible, common, the kind of item designed to disappear into crowds. The holster, however, told a different story. Its position was unusual, placed low, centered incorrectly, not where someone experienced would carry it, suggested something critical, preparation without experience, planning without mastery, confidence without skill, and that combination is dangerous, because it means the suspect believed he was ready. But belief does not erase evidence, and evidence does not forget. Even more disturbing was what investigators discovered next. This had not been his first visit. Another image existed. Same figure, same mask, same door, different day he had been there, before. Watching, learning, waiting. The comparison immediately reminded investigators of another case. Another suspect, another man who had studied his victims before acting. Brian Koberger, a name that had become synonymous with patience and violence, a man who had walked past his targets again and again before choosing his moment. The pattern was familiar, and patterns are how predators operate. They do not rush, they prepare, they observe, they return, and when the moment finally arrives, they act with the confidence of someone who has already rehearsed it in their mind. Which raises the question investigators cannot ignore. How long had he been watching her? Days, weeks, or longer? Because surveillance leaves traces, and somewhere, someone may have seen him without realizing what they were seeing. A stranger who did not belong. A face that stayed too long. A presence that felt wrong. The video proves he existed. It proves he stood there. It proves he made contact with the only witness that could identify him. And it proves he failed to stop it from remembering. In the days that followed, the investigation expanded outward from the front porch into the surrounding desert, into databases, into stores, into the quiet private lives of thousands of people who had no idea they were being measured against a man without a face. The image captured on the camera became the center of everything. Every movement analyzed, every detail magnified, every possibility considered. But physical evidence does not always cooperate. Nearly 2 miles from the home, search teams discovered something abandoned along a roadside. Pair of black gloves, ordinary in appearance, the same kind worn by millions of people every winter. But these were different because of where they were found, and because of when. They were collected carefully, bagged, logged, transported. Inside a laboratory, technicians began the slow process of extracting what could not be seen. DNA. The biological signature every person leaves behind without realizing it was there. Partial, degraded, but present. Hope rose quickly. If the profile matched someone already in the system, the search could end overnight. The sample was entered into the national database maintained by the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Millions of records, millions of identities, millions of chances for recognition. The result came back empty. No matched, no named, no history, which meant something investigators understand immediately. If the gloves belonged to the suspect, he had never been caught before. Or he had never been caught doing anything that required his DNA to be taken, which makes him harder to find and easier to hide. Inside the home, the situation was even more complicated. Multiple DNA profiles had been recovered. Some belonged to family members. Some belonged to visitors. Some could not be identified at all. Mixed samples take time to separate. Time investigators did not feel they had. Because time is not neutral. Time helps the person running. Time hurts the person taken. And Nancy Guthrie did not have the luxury of waiting. She was 84 years old, dependent on medication, dependent on stability, dependent on routines that had now been broken by force. Every hour without those medications carried risk. Every day increased the danger. And still there was no contact, no demands, no confirmation she was alive. Until suddenly, there was a message arrived at a local television station. Direct, demanding millions of dollars in cryptocurrency in exchange for her return. It included instructions, deadlines, warnings. Fear spread quickly. Because ransom introduces a possibility that had not existed before. Survival. Her family faced a decision no one prepares for. Speak publicly and risk escalating the situation, or stay silent and risk losing her forever. They chose to speak. Savannah Guthrie appeared beside her siblings, her voice controlled but fragile. She asked for compassion, for help, for mercy from whoever was responsible. She stepped away from her role on the Today Show, stepped away from cameras that had once been safe and predictable, because this time the story was hers. But investigators faced a problem the public could not see. Anyone can send a ransom message. Anyone can pretend, and pretending happens often. Within days, one man was arrested and charged with sending fake threats connected to the case. He had no involvement in the disappearance, no knowledge of her location, only the intention to exploit attention, which raised a terrifying possibility. What if the real suspect was not communicating at all? What if the silence was intentional? Because silence protects, silence delays, silence gives control to the person who already has it. Tips continued to flood in. Thousands of calls, thousands of emails, thousands of moments people suddenly remembered and questioned. A vehicle parked too long, a stranger walking without purpose, a figure standing where no one should have been standing. But tips are not solutions. Tips are beginnings. And most beginnings lead nowhere. Investigators returned to the video repeatedly, watching not just what the suspect did, but how he did it. His posture, his balance, the way he used his hands. Behavior reveals identity in ways faces cannot. He did not move like someone improvising completely. He moved like someone following a plan, which meant the plan had been built somewhere else. Before that night, before that door, before that moment, attention shifted toward the neighborhood itself, toward routines, toward patterns, toward the possibility that the suspect had blended into the environment long before he covered his face. Residents were asked to review their own surveillance footage, days, weeks, even months before the disappearance, looking for anything that did not belong, anything that did not make sense. Because criminals rarely appear out of nowhere. They emerge from proximity, from familiarity, from opportunity built slowly over time. Search teams expanded outward into the desert surrounding Tucson. Helicopters scanned terrain that could hide vehicles, hide evidence, hide bodies. Each empty mile increased the uncertainty. Each empty mile also increased the urgency. Because absence can mean two things: she was not there, or she had already been moved. And movement complicates everything. Investigators understood one truth above all others. The man in the video had existed in that space. Physically, temporarily, but undeniably, which meant he existed somewhere else too, without the mask, without the gloves, without the protection of anonymity, living a life that continued forward while hers remained frozen on the other side of a closed door. By the time investigators entered the final phase of their fourth week searching for Nancy Guthrie, the case had already begun to shift from a missing person investigation into something far more complex. What had once been treated as a possible burglary was now being examined as a targeted disappearance. And the reason for that shift was not a confession, not a witness, but a pattern. Agents from the Federal Bureau of Investigation returned again to the surveillance timeline. Not just the night she vanished, but the days leading up to it. They slowed it down frame by frame. They watched how the masked figure approached the door, how he stopped, how he faced the camera, and how he never once attempted to hide from it. That detail mattered. Because experienced offenders do not always conceal themselves immediately. Sometimes they want to be seen. Sometimes control is the objective, and control begins long before the crime itself. When investigators mapped the suspect's appearances, they noticed something even more disturbing. His earlier visit happened at nearly the same time of night. The same darkness, the same stillness, as if he had already chosen the hour, as if he already knew when she would be alone. There were no signs of forced entry captured on camera. No shattered glass. No sudden movements. Nothing that reflected panic or urgency, which raised a question investigators could not ignore. Did she open the door willingly? Inside the home, the answers did not come easily. The scene was quiet, undisturbed in some places, completely wrong in others. Her phone was there. Her shoes were there. Her medications, critical medications she depended on, were still inside. People do not choose to leave those things behind, especially not voluntarily, especially not at 84 years old. Investigators began interviewing neighbors again, not just asking what they saw, but what they heard. And in one of those interviews, a detail emerged that had not seemed important before. A neighbor reported hearing what they believed was a voice outside sometime after midnight. Not shouting, not arguing. Talking. It did not last long, just seconds. But it suggested something critical: interaction, which meant the masked figure may not have forced the encounter. He may have initiated it, and she may have responded. Investigators considered the possibility that the suspect had gained her trust in some way, that his earlier visit was not reconnaissance alone but introduction. Because when someone answers the door at that hour, there is usually a reason. Recognition, authority. Or fear. Meanwhile, forensic teams continued examining the physical evidence collected inside the house. Among the most significant findings was the small bloodstain discovered near the entrance. It was not large. It did not suggest prolonged violence, but it should not have been there at all. Its presence confirmed that something physical had happened inside that home. Something investigators believed she did not survive easily. But without a body, without a confirmed suspect, the case remained suspended in uncertainty. Public attention intensified as her daughter, Savannah Guthrie, spoke publicly, asking for information, asking for answers, asking for her mother to be found. The emotional weight of the case spread far beyond the quiet streets of Tucson. Tips began pouring in. Most led nowhere, but each one forced investigators to consider new possibilities, new scenarios, new outcomes, and still, the masked figure remained unidentified. No named, no arrest, no explanation. Only images that showed him standing there, waiting, watching, returning. Former agents reviewing the footage later pointed out a detail that most people would never notice. The suspect never knocked immediately. He paused first, seconds passed. Sometimes longer. As if listening. As if confirming something inside. That behavior suggested confidence, not hesitation, which raised the most chilling possibility of all. That he already knew she was there. That he already knew she was alone. And that everything that followed had been set in motion long before anyone realized she was in danger. Because crimes like this do not begin when someone disappears. They begin when someone decides to watch, decides to approach, decides to act. And somewhere in that timeline, investigators believe is the moment where this case can still be solved. The moment where the unknown becomes known. The moment where the person behind the mask becomes a name. Until then, the house remains empty. The door remains closed. And the camera that captured the only clear image of the person responsible continues to hold the secret everyone is trying to unlock. A secret that may already be closer to the surface than anyone realizes. If this investigation has stayed with you the way it has stayed with investigators, subscribe to this channel for updates as new information surfaces. The break is waiting for could arrive without warning. We will be here when it happens.